Guys, it's Mrs. Lamphere, and you probably saw our principal, Mrs. Prashant. You probably saw her K-mail this week about us closing our computers at 1 o'clock today on Friday. So I knew that was going to mess with our green design and technology class connect. So I wanted to do a pre-recording so that you could still kind of get in on the class and I could get this information out to you. So I'm doing this kind of pre-recording to share with you information. We are looking at section 5 called Green Agriculture. Okay, so in this section we talk a lot about agriculture, which is the production of crops and livestock. The agricultural process includes production, so when the crops or livestock are raised, the processing, when those crops, meat and dairy, and other items are processed into actual products. Delivery, the ag products are transported to wherever they are sold, and then also marketing. The combination of ways companies research, plan for, and communicate with customers, sellers, and producers of products. So all of these four parts go into the actual process of agriculture. So it's not just crops and livestock, it's the production, it's the whole process of planting the crops, raising the crops, processing them, delivering them, marketing them. That all goes into play when we talk about agriculture. Okay, for crop production, there's a few different ways that we can produce crops. One is annual cultivation, and this is the method of crop production in which one crop is planted each year. So cultivation means the act of raising crops, and so annual cultivation is common where the climate only allows farmers to grow crops during part of the year. So every year the farmer will plant one crop, harvest it, and it's just the one crop planted and harvested each year one time. Multiple cropping is a method of crop production in which two or more crops are planted on the same area of land in the same year. In multiple cropping, more than one crop can be growing on the same land at the same time, or one crop can be planted after the previous crop is harvested. Being from Nebraska, I've seen this done a lot where farmers will use the same plot of land they alternate beans and corn. So one year they'll plant beans, one year they'll plant corn, and that's an example of multiple cropping. Then we have shifting cultivation, and shifting cultivation is a method of crop production that involves cutting and burning forests or fields, then using that land to grow crops for several years or until the land no longer supports crops, and then letting that field lie fallow for many years. So fallow means, fallow describes a field that was used to grow crops but isn't being used to grow crops anymore. So a fallow period for a field is a time for the field to regrow those natural grasses, weeds, trees, and restore those nutrients in the soil. In this shifting cultivation, the fallow period is necessary for returning the soil back to the nutrient-rich environment before it's used to produce crops again. So this is that kind of, they burn off all the trees and products that are on the land, use it for planting fields. Once that soil is worn out, they let the natural grass and trees grow back, and then they kind of start the whole process over again. It goes on for years and years. Uses for livestock. So livestock can actually have many uses. A lot of people, when they think livestock, they think of meat, but we can actually use them for more than just meat. We can use them for dairy products. Their manure can be used as fertilizer. A lot of their hide and skin can be turned into leather and create fabrics and clothing. So there's lots of uses for livestock. Growth hormones is talked about on the next page when we're talking about livestock production and care. And with growth hormones, these are substances that can make livestock grow faster or produce more milk. They are USDA and FDA approved, but there's a lot of controversy around whether or not growth hormone residue is actually safe. So when it gets into the meat or when it gets passed through the livestock as waste and then gets into the ground and then they eat the grass again and There's a lot of controversy as to whether or not that's actually safe. There haven't been really enough test results to determine that. But so far, they're still FDA and USDA approved. However, growth hormones are not allowed in European countries. So a lot of countries in Europe have determined that they don't like what they've seen as far as test results go for what growth hormones can do to livestock, to the food that they produce, and the other products that they produce. So they actually ban growth hormones from being used in livestock. But in the United States, it's still okay. Aquaculture. Aquaculture is the farming of fish, underwater plants, and other organisms that live in the water. Organisms are being cared for by humans in some way. So it's not it's not a completely natural setting. They're being cared for by humans, whether it's made in human-made ponds, indoor tanks, the food that they're feeding them, they're being cared for by humans. Some aquaculture is being done by raising fish and underwater plants in the open ocean. So they might be using some space in the actual ocean. But this creates environmental concerns. Waste can be created by the fish or other organisms that easily pollute the ocean, and this can create new diseases. So aquaculture, again, it's kind of raising water, fish, underwater plants, other organisms that live in the water, raised by humans, but there is some kind of controversy on whether or not they should be raised in the open ocean just because of the pollutants that they can create. Okay, so on your assignment for this section, here's some questions that specifically refer to Lesson 1. Pick a food you're familiar with and then answer the following questions about it. Use the web to do research if you need to. How is the food produced? So for instance, if it's made from crops, explain what type of crop production is most likely used. We learned about those several different types of crop production. So maybe you chose corn. So being from Nebraska, I'm going to say corn. So explain what type of crop production is most likely used. How is the food processed and made for delivery? For example, are there other ingredients added? Is the food canned or put into other types of containers? So with corn, they can, it kind of comes in a lot of different, it can come as several different products. So as canned corn, corn on the cob, cream corn, it can be turned into ethanol for gasoline, and so on. What part of the world is the food produced in? How far does the food need to be transported? For example, does it have to go all the way around the world, across the continent, or is it produced locally? So for me to say corn, I can get corn when I go back into Nebraska, or when I buy corn from the store. It's probably not being transported from across the world. It's somewhere, some farm in the United States is producing that corn. But if you chose a different product that maybe is not produced in the United States, then that might adjust your answer for this question. For the food you wrote down above, describe the impact the food's production, processing, and delivery has on the environment. Explain which parts of the process harm the environment and how. So if you are talking about a food that's coming to you from across the country or around the world, that whole transportation of that food to get to you is going to have some harmful effects on the environment. Also talk about how is that food produced, the processing of that food. So again, if you chose a food and you're not really familiar with it, use the web to do some research. Can this food be made in a more sustainable way? If so, describe how. If not, explain why not. So I'm going to my corn example. Being picky, I prefer the corn from Nebraska, but there are some local farmers in Colorado that produce corn, and so that could be a more sustainable way for me to get my corn fill, would be to purchase from local suppliers. Do you think livestock producers should be allowed to give growth hormones to livestock? So this is kind of there's not really a right or wrong answer, but you do need to kind of defend your stance as to whether or not you think growth hormones should be given. Describe one of the ways that aquaculture negatively impacts the environment. We talked about how in the ocean those wastes are created. Maybe do some research and find some other ones, but explain what the problem is and which part of aquaculture production causes the problem. Okay, moving into lesson 2 of section 5. This lesson focuses more on property rights and sustainability. So property is something a person, group, or company can own. Property rights are a collection of rights that include, so when you own some property, you usually have the right to use the property in pretty much whatever way you want. The right to make money off the property, the right to transfer these rights to another person. You have the right to do any of those things when you own property. These rights need to be limited in order to create more sustainable environment. Some people think change in property rights is needed to develop a truly sustainable world. Others think close management of resources through better laws will be enough. So there are some laws when it comes to property rights and what you can use your property for. For instance, if a company had some land and they wanted to build a factory, well, there's some regulations with pollution and waste that they're producing that they have to follow. And some people think that more property rights need to be developed in order to make our world more sustainable. And others just think it needs to be a little more closely managed. Water use laws are are some laws that can also deal with property rights. Government usually creates laws or regulations to make sure water is available to everyone. Usually rivers and lakes are publicly owned. Resources are shared by everyone. Farms and people who live on farms are very affected by water use laws. Much of their water comes from groundwater available from their property. In some cases, governments limit water use by requiring a permit to use it. So this doesn't really affect people that live in like urban areas or cities. But if they live like out on the farm or out in the country and they use a lot more water than most people to water their crops, or water the livestock, whatever, these water use laws can really have an effect on those families. Okay, so that kind of leads us to our next question. What are some problems that could happen if water use wasn't regulated? Describe at least 2 problems. So what if the government said, hey, go ahead and use however much water you want. It's a free-for-all. What problems do you foresee happening if that were the case? Describe at least 2 problems that you think could come from that. Section 3 then, or lesson 3, focuses on organic products and organic product production. So organic means that something was grown or made without the use of synthetic materials. And in case you're wondering what synthetic materials are, these are something created by humans through chemical processes, artificial or unnatural. So anything that was created by humans that is not natural and has been added to the food, that would be considered synthetic material. So organic products cannot have any synthetic materials. Organic crops can't be grown with the help of synthetic pesticides, fertilizers, or any other synthetic substance. So they can't use any chemicals to help their crops. It's got to be just all natural. Organic livestock can't be produced using growth hormones or antibiotics. Again, no synthetic materials. Usually require more labor to create. So because there is more manual labor involved with organic products, they're usually more expensive. You've probably noticed at the grocery store when you see the organic foods next to the non-organic foods. The organic products are usually more expensive because it does take a little more work to produce those products. But they do have some great impacts on the environment. They don't release harmful pollutants into the soil or groundwater, so because there's none of that synthetic material being used, you're not creating extra pollutants. It doesn't burn near as many fossil fuels for the production of organic materials, and also produces much less waste. So even though it's more expensive, it is definitely more environmentally friendly to use organic products. Many countries have created a certification process that helps people make sure the product they're buying is organic. Most organic certifications don't require that the product be 100% organic. So a lot of certification organizations understand that it might not be logical to require that they're 100% organic. Some synthetic materials might get worked in. So for instance, the USDA requires that at least 95% of the ingredients need to be organic in order to receive the USDA organic certification. but this can be a very expensive process. So a lot of small farmers and farmers that aren't producing bulk items go for a cheaper organization like Certified Naturally Grown. So this is a nonprofit organization, and again, it's a popular organic certifier for small farms. The fee is much, much less. So this is a nonprofit, but they can still certify that your product is organic. Gardening is another way of supporting local agriculture. You could participate in a community garden. So a community garden is taken care of by a group of people. They provide fresh plants for the community. There is very few to no fossil fuels being burned in the transportation. So everybody in this community would kind of help with and share in this garden, and then kind of take the produce that they need, and which therefore kind of eliminates the need for transportation. If you don't have land or space to create your own garden, your text suggests to create one of these I believe it's pronounced hydroponic or hydroponic gardens. This is growing plants without soil. This is something I'm going to try next year for sure. This would be like window farms, rooftop gardens. I've actually heard about like urban gardens where they create just kind of boxes that you would put out and grow your different plants. So there's a lot of alternatives that you can use. If you don't have space for a garden, you can still grow some of your own veggies. Okay, some questions that go along with this lesson. Imagine you are creating your own organic certification system. What will the requirements be for something to be considered organic? Will you require 100% of the ingredients to be organic? Why or why not? Will you allow the use of genetically modified organisms? Why or why not? So you might want to read through your text in this lesson 3 a little more. I didn't want to make this video super long, so I didn't go into a lot of detail, but definitely check out the pages in lesson 3 to get a little more information for that question. If you wanted to create a garden for growing your own food, where would you create it? You could create a garden in a community garden space, start a window farm, create a rooftop garden, or create a garden somewhere else. Explain why you would choose this type of garden and describe at least 2 positive effects it would have on the environment. So pretend you're growing a garden and let me know where you're going to grow it, how you're going to grow it, and what are some positive effects about growing your own garden. Okay, so lesson 4 then of section 5 gets more into talking about sustainable agriculture. So currently we are kind of in this industrialization of agriculture where we have lots of new technologies that help us to produce more efficiently and produce more products. But this type of agricultural process could use a lot of fossil fuels, animal cruelty, disease control, and the presence of harmful substances in food. So there's a lot of interest in changing agricultural processes to make them more sustainable. So these are a couple of processes that your text talks about and how we can make agriculture more sustainable. Better crop production. Organic farms burn fewer fossil fuels. They maintain biodiversity, maintain the health of soil, produce less waste. You can create biofuels from crops. For instance, a lot of corn can be turned into ethanol gasoline. We can also have better livestock production. Grass-fed livestock do not use antibiotics, protects the environment from pollution. It fertilizes naturally, produces a healthier meat for humans. So these are both great ways to make agriculture more sustainable. So you'll notice that they're both leaning more towards the organic movement rather than the unorganic, which includes a lot of hormones, pesticides, and all that. Better aquaculture production. This would not include growth hormones, pesticides, antibiotics. Do not create pollutants in the environment. Waste from fish can be used as food for algae. Increase local agriculture. Supporting small farms would be more sustainable farming techniques. Products don't need to travel so far. Buying local products, growing your own garden, joining a food cooperative. These are all ways of making agriculture more sustainable. So just by using less products, creating less waste, This would, all of these methods would help to make all agriculture more sustainable and have less of an impact on the environment. So after learning about those 4 different ways to make agriculture more sustainable, those were the 4 ways discussed in lesson 4. So which of those ideas from section 5 do you think is making or will make the greatest impact on the environment? So of those different, would better crop production, better livestock production, better aquaculture production, or increased local agriculture, which of those do you think would have the most impact on the environment? And why would that have more impact than the other ideas? So you kind of decide. Again, there's no really right or wrong answer, but make sure that you explain the answer you chose. If all the ideas from section 5, lesson 4 were used everywhere on the earth, would the agricultural industry be 100% sustainable? Why or why not? What do you think? If we were to kind of take on the European Union stance where they said, okay, no more growth hormones, no more artificial products going into our meat. If we did that to our livestock, to our crops, to our fish, do you think that's a realistic thing? Could that be sustainable? So again, no really right or wrong answer, just kind of your thoughts on that. And again, of course, an explanation on why you think the way you do. Here is a quick look at our calendar for the rest of the course, really. We are on May 9th today, so we need to have you should be completed through section 4, and you should have at least your study questions through section 5 completed, because this Sunday is when we run up against that next zeros deadline. So next week we'll be finishing section 5 and starting in on our last section, section 6, and we should be done by the 22nd. So not much more in this class. The last day for you to submit then materials from section 5 or section 6 will be May 27th, is when all the coursework is due. And since there is no final in this class, you don't have to worry about this last day of school date, May 29th. Everything needs to be in on May 27th. And that will do it for today. Thanks, guys.